So if you were asked to describe a life, a life lived outside of a romantic partnership, what's the first feeling that comes to mind? I think for a lot of people, the cultural default, it's often that life is provisional.
Provisional, right. Like it's a waiting room.
Exactly. It's an asterisk next to a name. Or it's the time you're spending before the real story, the coupled story, actually starts.
That cultural assumption, I mean, the idea that a non-partnered life is somehow structurally incomplete. It's so powerful. It's almost gravitational, isn't it?
It really is.
It suggests that a life can only achieve its proper orbit when it's tethered to another person. It's pervasive and honestly pretty exhausting.
Okay, let's unpack that assumption then, because today we're doing a deep dive into some source material that just completely refuses that entire premise.
Yeah.
We're looking at excerpts from Jaime Hoerricks' lyrical meditation on solitude, which is titled Beyond the Couple. Opting out is also a whole.
In this piece, it's not just an argument for being single. It's a profound philosophical reframing. Hoerricks challenges what they call romance's teleology.
Which is a bit of a mouthful.
It is, yeah. But if we break that down, it's just the cultural belief that a romantic relationship is the mandatory, the inevitable finish line for everyone, the necessary final destination of a mature human life.
And the power of this perspective is so immediate. It just refuses all of those deficit narratives. It emphasizes this core foundational insight. Nothing is missing. Nothing is on hold. It's just a statement of complete present wholeness.
Right. And I think our goal in this deep dive is to really pull out the key mechanisms of that argument. We need to understand how the source positions solitude not as an absence, not as a vacuum, but as a complete sovereign structure, what the author calls a whole Gestalt.
Yeah.
And I think more importantly, what that means for your autonomy.
And that brings us straight to the absolute heart of the matter, which is this idea of the sovereign center. Our culture conditions us to look for an external center, to gather around, a partner, a family unit. But the source introduces this new concept, lives that do not gather around a center because they are the center.
And that is a radical shift in perspective.
It's huge.
It is. It's the difference between orbiting something and being the thing that is orbited. Hoerricks describes this inherent completeness as a life settled into itself. Settled into itself. Yeah. It is explicitly not waiting to be joined or completed. It's this state of internal resolve where your identity is just, it's fully self-validated.
And that state of resolution, of being settled into yourself, that's what the author defines as sovereignty. But I find it so interesting that this sovereignty isn't described as some triumphant outward declaration.
No, not at all.
The text notes that this sovereign life is not loud, not exemplary. It doesn't need to perform or put on a show for anyone. It just exists, fully self-justified.
And that quiet assertion of self-sufficiency is where the concept of sovereignty really gets its weight. Sovereignty, in this context, it just translates to radical self-ownership.
Radical self-ownership.
Yeah. It means your inherent worth, your direction, your value, they aren't determined by a contract with another person. You are self-governing. You hold intrinsic authority over your own existence.
But I do wonder if the life is so internally focused, so self-sufficient, does that degree of radical self-ownership risk total isolation? Is the author suggesting partnership is somehow bad for the self, or are they just carving out space for an alternative?
That's a really necessary friction point to bring up. Hoerricks isn't arguing against partnership, but against its compulsory cultural status.
Okay.
The point is not isolation, but autonomy. The life is complete before any external relationship is factored in. So if a partnership arrives, it's an addition, not a solution to some perceived problem. It's not filling a lack.
That distinction, addition, not solution, is so crucial. And it leads us right to this concept of refusal. Specifically, the refusal of what the source calls compulsory translation.
This might be the most relatable idea in the entire piece. Compulsory translation is that constant, draining cultural demand that's placed on non-partnered people to explain themselves.
To justify their life.
Yes, to translate their complete life back into the primary language of romantic goals. I mean, think about it. Every holiday dinner, every wedding, you're facing questions like, why are you still single? Or, so what are you doing until you find someone?
It's that constant expectation that your current status has to be interpreted as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. I was just thinking about the cultural pressure around bringing a +1 to events.
Oh, absolutely.
It's almost a mechanism of that compulsory translation. You have to signal that you are either successfully partnered or at least actively seeking it, just to validate your presence.
Exactly. And what Hoerricks argues is that honoring these sovereign lives includes asserting the right not to translate, the right to just exist without apology, without having to reframe your completeness into a story that only recognizes partnered milestones as valid achievements.
It's a refusal.
It's a total refusal to engage in that defensive, diminishing dialogue.
And that takes the conversation out of the realm of deficit, this idea that you are lacking something,
Yeah.
and into a positive affirmation that you are an integrated, complete structure, operating under its own internal laws.
And that self-affirmation is what frees the self from that provisional narrative.
Okay, so let's turn to that idea now and just dismantle this provisional narrative head on. The problem with provisionality is that it labels a person as in between.
Right.
If this life is sovereign and complete, what specific language does the source use to tear down the idea that this status is just temporary?
The language is, it's absolute. The author offers this defiant declaration. Nothing here is provisional. She states that the life is not a holding pattern. But to really get the impact of that, we have to look at why society demands this provisional narrative in the first place.
That's a great point. Why can't society just accept wholeness?
Well, because the provisional narrative is a vital cog in the machine of romance's teleology. If you view the non-partnered life as temporary, you keep people chasing the culturally approved destination.
And that destination, the nuclear couple, is tied to all sorts of things.
All sorts of things. Economic structures, generational reproduction, housing, consumption patterns. If you accept a life as whole outside of that goal, you lose the leverage of cultural pressure.
So it's a form of social engineering, basically. It's telling you your life doesn't really count until you get the official stamp of partnership.
Precisely. And to prove that this life already counts, Hoerricks gives us 3 distinct rebuttals to that narrative, focusing on this metaphorical figure of the solitary forager.
Ugh, these 3 knots. They really define the boundary of sovereignty, don't they? They're so specific and powerful.
They are. So first, the solitary forager is not standing at the edge of something better. This means her present existence is not a downgraded or lesser version of the life she's supposed to be living.
This is the main show.
This is the main show. Second, she is not between chapters. Her life is its own integrated, self-contained book. She's not waiting for a co-author to start chapter 4.
And
third, which is probably the most critical challenge to the idea of romantic destiny, she is not resting before arrival.
That third point is so heavy with implication. Because if you define the relationship status as arrival, then everything that comes before it is just downtime.
Right.
It makes life feel like a waiting game, which just saps all the energy and purpose from the present moment.
It does. It forces you, the listener, to constantly evaluate your current state based on some future external measure of success. Hoerricks is saying, stop looking ahead. The life has already been lived right here, right now, in its own complete way.
Okay, here's where we get to the really tangible part of the argument for me. If the life is complete in itself, if it has already arrived, what does that feel like? What is the texture of this settled sovereign existence? It can't just be high-level philosophy.
No, it has to have daily evidence, and it's deeply sensory. It's grounded in routine. The source describes these tangible characteristics of a life settled into itself, focusing on these small, quiet moments that convey a calm authority.
Okay.
The first detail is morning light falling where it always does.
Wow. That simple phrase, it just speaks volumes about stability and control, doesn't it? The light is predictable. There's no negotiation about the space, no compromises about the environment.
No disruptive schedules from someone else.
It's a space that's mastered by the self.
Yes, it's what you could call spatial sovereignty. And the second detail connects that self-mastery to action, hands knowing their work. This suggests competence, deep internal routine, self-reliance. It's that quiet satisfaction of knowing you can handle what needs to be done without needing instruction or external support.
And the third detail, which I think is maybe the most universally sought-after state of being, is time moving without being chased.
That is the ultimate indicator of self-governance. When you're chasing time, you are almost always operating under external pressure, right?
Deadlines, yeah.
Deadlines, the demands of coordinating 2 separate schedules, the perceived ticking clock of biological or societal expectations timelines for having kids or buying a house.
But when you're internally centered, the speed of life is set by your own rhythm. You're not forced to speed up or slow down based on someone else's path.
Exactly. The energy that normally goes into social performance or, constant interpersonal negotiation is instead reinvested into cultivating that internal rhythm.
It means the relationship with time itself is sovereign.
You own your time. You are not beholden to anyone else's timeline or arrival date.
Let's delve back into that figure of the solitary forager,
Right.
because that metaphor really holds this whole texture together. The term implies this deep engagement with the present, but also this ability to be mobile or shift focus.
The solitary forager is such a brilliant synthesis of independence and rootedness. Hoerricks notes this beautiful duality. Sometimes she settles into a small orbit of place, routine, soil, tools, familiar paths.
She builds structure.
She builds structure and stability. But because she's a forager, she always maintains the ability to wander, to shift her orbit whenever she chooses.
So the power isn't in staying put or in constantly moving.
Well,
It's in the internal control over the decision itself. And the defining trait of this entire existence, whether it's settled or wandering, is captured in this one beautiful line: a life grown slowly, without witnesses.
that phrase is just the perfect summation of sovereignty, isn't it? The growth is self-directed. It's independent of external approval or observation. It confirms that the life is defined by internal cultivation, not by external visibility.
The completeness is inside the growth itself.
Exactly. Regardless of whether that life is seen or validated by the partnership-centric culture around it.
So what does this all mean for us? I mean, as we synthesize the core knowledge from Hoerricks' work, it seems like defining solitude as sovereignty is a complete rejection of these cultural deficit models.
It is.
It's a mechanism for shifting the self from orbiting external expectations, that idea of waiting for completion, to just confidently standing as its own complete sovereign center.
And the significance here for you, the listener, is that this provides a practical framework. It's a tool for thinking critically about your own identity and about cultural pressure. It forces us to prioritize our inherent wholeness over any perceived lack, asking a fundamental question every day. Am I operating based on internal affirmation or on external validation?
That focus, that distinction between internal validation versus external observation, a life grown slowly without witnesses, that really provides the final provocative layer of this whole deep dive.
It really does, because if a life achieves completeness when grown without witnesses, what does that fundamentally imply about the role of observation or external approval in validating human existence? We so often confuse a life lived with a life seen. And I think Hoerricks asks us to consider, what is the profound sovereign distinction between those two things, and which one are you building?